Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Community America Credit Union. My name is Joel Goldberg. I'm so excited for my guest today. He's a guy that I've had the chance to get to know over the last 13, 14 months. We have a lot of similarities in terms of taking the sports world and sharing it with what I call the quote unquote real world. The sports world is real too. We know that one, but there's a bit of, at least in my mind, some fantasy elements in sports. But there's also so much of what goes on in that world in terms of building successful teams and leadership, diverse backgrounds that apply to anything. And I was lucky enough over the last year plus to have been introduced to a gentleman by the name of Paul Epstein. And Paul believes that there are two types of people in this world: those who play defense and those who play offense. And there'll be a great sports tie here. These insights around purpose, performance, and impact were gathered over a 15-year run as a professional sports executive, where Paul successfully steered business teams that executed billion-dollar NFL campaigns, broke Super Bowl revenue records, and generated league-leading sales results for cellar-dwelling NBA clubs. Paul's proudest moment was when he was internally known as the why coach at the San Francisco 49ers, coaching others to find their why and act on it. Paul has now curated the most actionable takeaways into a leader's playbook of how he and his teams produce this impact in these hyper-competitive environments. He calls it playing offense. We'll get to know Paul, also the personal side, and I just love what he is doing with all of these lessons in helping others. So I'm excited right now to bring in to the podcast. It's like a home and home. I was on his and he's on mine. I think his is coming out a little bit later. Paul, thanks for joining Rounding the Bases.
Yeah, fired up, Joel. Let's do it.
Well, I like this too because it gives me, as I joked with you, that you asked me all the questions on yours and then just shut up and let me talk. So I'm going to try to do that as gracefully as you did with me, because I know that you have a lot to say. But tell me a little bit about your background first, because you lived in that NFL and NBA world, but I think a world that not a lot of people know because we don't see it on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a very interesting backstory where if you were to even back the truck up a bit. So when I was in undergrad, I went to USC. I'm an LA boy, so didn't fly far from the nest, if you will. There weren't even a lot of sports management programs back then. So if you would have said, of course, sports was always a passion, but I never knew it could actually turn into a job, nevertheless, a career. Nevertheless, in my case, I actually found my calling because of an experience that Joel already mentioned in my introduction at the 49ers. And so it was about a year after undergrad. And for those familiar with Mel Kiper, he is an NFL draft guru and just a super high energy guy. So I was working as a territory sales manager at the time for just a consumer goods company. And I literally had the Dodge Chrysler Caravan, and I'm going down the street, and I think, I don't know, let's say it was a 35 mile per hour zone. And all of a sudden I have it on ESPN radio, and Mel comes in just fired up. And he says, have you ever wanted to work in sports? Have you ever dreamed of working for your favorite MLB, NFL, NBA? And I'm flying like, yes. And his call to action was call 1-877-SMWW now. SMWW stands for Sports Management Worldwide. They do online courses still alive to this day. And that is how I got my break in, Joel. And so literally from an infomercial, I call it, a radio advertisement, Mel hooked me. Mel got me. I was awakened to the fact that I could actually work in a space of passion. And so that was the breakthrough and the birth of a 15-year eventual journey. Started selling tickets for the LA Clippers when ESPN called them the worst brand in sports. Sports Illustrated then doubled down and said worst franchise in sports history. Meanwhile, the Lakers are kicking butt with Kobe and Shaq at the time. And so you want to talk about a tough sell. I enter a sales room that, if anybody has seen the movie Boiler Room, it was pretty much like that. I was the only person that even made it to the second month on the job in my class. And thankfully, I had a gift for gab. I had a way of connecting with folks. I had a way of generating results, which at the entry level was the only method of survival. And so lo and behold, a couple promotions up, a couple years later, I end up managing the sales room that I once started in. And that was my introduction to leadership. I will say this before I continue with a bit on the journey. I used to think that there was no difference between management and leadership. And I do want to come back to that because I can transparently say that my entry level management role I had for 2 years. And in the first year, I sucked for the majority of it. I had to figure it out. I made a ton of massive mistakes. I did things that I would not have followed myself. Nevertheless, try to inspire others to follow me. But lo and behold, through a lot of really candid conversations, great friendships, great relationships, I started to figure it out. And that's what gets me on the rest of the journey, Joel. So from LA in leadership roles to New Orleans, the then Hornets, now they're the Pelicans, then Sacramento Kings. Interesting parts of those two spots were New Orleans, we were going to lose the franchise if we didn't produce certain economic results from the then commissioner, David Stern. Thankfully, we inspired the city around purpose through an I'm In campaign. We can absolutely touch on that. When I go to Sacramento, there was an NBA lockout. So if you haven't picked it up just yet, I have a fondness for storms and I enjoy adversity apparently because that's just the way the cards were dealt. Then I go to New York and New Jersey and I work for a global agency owned by the Yankees, who I know you love, and the Cowboys. It's called Legends. I end up at the NFL League office overseeing a Super Bowl revenue campaign. And last but not least, head up sales and biz dev for the Niners, help them open up Levi Stadium. And I am now out of breath. Joel, back to you.
I love it. See, this is great. This is what I did to you. I just sit back and I could listen and listen and listen because it's all good stuff. And then we pick each other up. Like, all right, I'll add a thought and ask a question while you take a swig of water and we go back and forth. You and I may sound like we're starting a law firm, Goldberg, Epstein, and we need one more.
Or we could just say and associates.
And associates.
Yes.
I never had that in me to be a lawyer or a doctor for that matter. So I've settled in the next best thing. There aren't a whole lot of Goldbergs, by the way, that are tearing it up on the football field or the Bill Goldberg. Bill Goldberg once played for the Atlanta Falcons before he was the legendary wrestler. Yeah. But anyway, I digress. I want to ask you a little bit then about the jump, and then I want to circle back to some of what you just talked about. But to go from what sounds like an amazing job with the 49ers, and those that are watching on my YouTube feed will see the 49ers helmet on one side. I'm trying to avoid, I like your book is back there. We'll talk about that. It's a great backdrop. I don't like what's over your left shoulder, kind of below your left shoulder, because I'm a University of Wisconsin
This left
grad.
or this left? Which one are you talking about?
That ugly blue hat.
Oh, the blue one. Yeah. That's my MBA. So they always say your heart is with your undergrad. So while I say fight on and go blue, certainly fight on digs deeper.
Yeah. I'm a Wisconsin Badger, so we're trained not to like Wolverines, even though the manager of the baseball team that I, cover and work with, the Kansas City Royals, is a former Wolverine himself. So I get myself into trouble with that. I'll say go Trojans. How about that? But
there you go.
You made the jump away from the NFL, Paul. And I think, I know what this is like. It's you're in a higher profile job. Anyone that can relate to, hey, he works for the 49ers. Wait a minute. What are you doing? Why would you leave the NFL? Why would you leave the 49ers? And I'm guessing that was sort of the safe job for you, but yet you went out on your own. Am I reading that right? How difficult was it to go out on your own?
Yeah, it's a great question. And frankly, it's one that led to the Jerry Maguire moment, as I always call it. I didn't have the goldfish in the little baggie. I didn't ask who's coming with me. In this case, my answer was, I'm coming with me. And I think at a major juncture in life, we should probably be asking ourselves, let's say you're at a fork in the road and there's a big potential decision. And if you go left, there's one path. And if you go right, it's another. Ask yourself the question, am I running away from something or am I running toward something? And so for me, the answer is I was running towards something. And what that leads to is you can go forward with no regrets. You never look back, because to your point, the easiest decision, Joel, is to stay on the treadmill that I was on. 100%. I could still be in sports. Nothing was broke. I had nothing to fix. I was happy with my team, my culture, my organization. But here's a minute or two on the backstory of why I'm no longer in sports. There was a leadership offsite retreat that changed my life. At this retreat, me and all of the fellow executive leaders, we found our why on a personal level. We walked away with a North Star. We had a why in words. Then we also unearthed our core values. And once I started to use my core values as a lens and a filter for how I make decisions in life, that was it. So for me, Joel, my top value is impact. And I asked myself, can I create more impact inside of these four walls or beyond? Those walls being the industry, those walls being the 49ers. And lo and behold, it wasn't even close. So yes, I took the leap. Yes, to the rest of the world, it seems like this massive thing. But you know what? I started to double down on my passions, my passion of inspiring purpose in others. That's how I became known as the why coach of the 49ers. It turned into a side hustle, if you will, nights, weekends, early mornings, late nights, the whole thing. And I fell more in love with my passion project than my day job. At that point, it was non-negotiable. I knew I had to get off the treadmill.
I love that. I could so relate to it. I didn't leave my job, but I added what I thought was a side hustle, which also became a main hustle. And you don't know until you know. I mean, in the simplest ways, you go there and it's a beautiful thing. You had a good job with the 49ers. You weren't the why coach. You weren't the why coach yet. It became an even better job, but you essentially have a life-changing, not even realizing it at the moment, a life-changing moment, which then leads to the rest of your journey just by going to that retreat, right?
Yeah. It was, you said this on my podcast, and I know you mentioned that we were just being on one another's, and you talked about just that commitment to the details, that putting yourself in a position where when opportunities knock, that you're ready, right? I think it was Seneca that said that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And so I felt like finding my why was the opportunity. It was that crack in the door. And had I not found my why, I would have not realized that I had a lot of tension against my purpose. So until you know your purpose, you don't realize you're not living true to it. Is probably the simplest way of thinking about it. And that retreat illuminated, this is who Paul is on his best day. Your why is duplicating that every single day. So you have nothing but best days because you're being true to yourself. And once I realized that I wasn't up to my full potential and I wasn't living true to my purpose and my why and my values, I knew that a change would become. But it took the story that I just shared to realize that this wasn't a sugar high. This was a permanent transformation.
I want to talk, this is so powerful. And the beauty of it all is that you've found so many of those answers. You'll continue to look for them too.
Yeah.
But you're sharing them with others. So, what you call your playmakers. And, I was lucky enough to be on your podcast, and I know that you have your playmakers community. And so that was cool. But the book, The Power of Playing Offense, there's so much wisdom in there. And I know that we could go on for hours and hours. Let's see if we can figure out how to sum up. I know that it's all important to you, your 5 pillars, and 2 of them are about leading self, 2 are about leading others. And then I think really interesting too, the 5th pillar is about leading the future. And so let's talk about that a little bit. I know there's a lot there, but there's a lot about purpose. And I love the way you talk about the long snapper too.
Yeah, so maybe we'll hop around here rather than do a deep dive in each of the pillars. But really, to me, the first pillar of live with championship purpose, for the reasons I've already mentioned, when something transforms you, when something takes over your life in a beautiful way, it would be selfish of me to not pay that forward. And so I realize so Mark Twain, phenomenal quote. And if others are not familiar with this, please take a look at this. Literally, it's it's my desktop background. Mark Twain enlightened us with a thought that the 2 most important days of your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. And after finding mine, I am 1,000,000% in the same camp. And so living with championship purpose to me, so far, if you listen to our conversation, purpose feels inspirational for sure. But if I had to play devil's advocate, let's say that I was listening and I said, this sounds too good to be true. All right, let me play that banjo for a second. If I had to be a devil's advocate against purpose, I would say it sounds too North Star. It sounds like it only works in the blue skies. It sounds like, you have optimal conditions or whatever, which, all right, let's play that. I actually, since finding and living true to my purpose has benefited me more in adversity than it has in blue skies. Purpose has become the fuel of courage, become the fuel of my resilience. Purpose has kept me on the treadmill, especially on the days I want to get off. That is the spirit of purpose. And so pillar 1 is about those blue skies. Pillar 2, be the storm chaser, is about adversity, but it's still connected to purpose. And that's why I wanted that through line, because without purpose, you're building a house on quicksand. Like, you don't even believe in the game that you're playing, the game of life. Purpose is the belief. And so if you don't believe in it, you're not going to get up off the mat when you get knocked down. It has to be bigger than you. So that's a bit about the first couple pillars. Salute the long snapper, which you mentioned. Now we get into leadership of others. I think, Joel, we missed the mark. I think that we're so, especially here in the United States for sure, we are so success driven. We're so enamored by the trophies and by achievement. And it starts early. Where'd you go to school? The first job, the brand. I work for this blue chip. I work for a Fortune 10. Dude, what if you're unhappy? Does that even matter? Like, I used to think it mattered, and now I realize it doesn't. And the reason I bring this up is that we're not always going to work for the big brand. We're not always going to be the quarterback. Sometimes we're the role player. Sometimes in football, we're the long snapper. And let me plug into your community right now. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Have you ever been in a situation where out of 100 things, you do 99 right and you never hear a word, but then you do one thing wrong and you never hear the end of it? Everybody listening, including you, Joel, and me, we've been there. And now think about that feeling. You're empty. You don't feel like you matter. You don't feel valued. You don't feel seen. You don't feel heard. That is the life of a long snapper. And until we shine a light in the darkest corners of the locker room, you're never going to get optimized performance, productivity, and in the business case, profits. Why? Because people don't show up as their whole self if they don't feel recognized. And so me saluting the long snapper, that was the spirit of it. And the conclusion of it is the fifth pillar, leave it better than you found it. And really, Joel, here's my piece on that. Success versus significance. If success is serving self, significance is serving others. I know many people that are successful, but don't feel significance. And yet, I don't know a single person that feels significance and is not successful. So instead of chasing success, maybe it's significance that we should be after.
Well, there's so much to digest there. It's all so powerful. It's all so real. And it applies to everyone. And I just want to get back for a moment before I get to the baseball theme questions to the long snapper, because I would challenge anyone watching or listening to ask yourself, in your world, if you're leading a company in your company, or you don't even have to be the leader, doesn't make a difference. If you are on any team, who is the long snapper in your organization? One. Two, are they valued? And beyond, are they valued? Do you let them know that?
Yeah.
Because without the long snappers in the world, you don't win.
No.
Right. And I think that when you understand that, it's not, this is not the catch-all, fix-all. If you recognize, the role player behind the scenes, that you're going to be successful. But I believe that if you don't recognize that person, you will in some form or another be unsuccessful. We all live in that world. A great example is every night at the end of any sports broadcast, you start hearing the announcers say, so-and-so is the producer, so-and-so is the director. And occasionally you see the credits pop up. And most average fan, they don't know what the producer does or the director does. And I could go into a lot of other details. But any one of us in television understand that if they don't do their job right, if the graphic doesn't pop up with the pitch speed because it's down, I hear about it. I'll get the tweets about it, not the person behind the scenes, because people don't know who they are. But you can't live without them. And I think this is my little rant here, and I just want you to pick up on it, that it is the long snapper, so to speak, is so often either overlooked, not valued, and that could come from themselves too, right? I mean, it's just, you cannot win without those people.
No. And here's the other reality of being a long snapper. Let's say if a quarterback is equivalent to a CEO, you could be a CEO in reality, and kudos, congrats. That's awesome. You're at the top of an organizational chart. Let's say you have a couple of little ones at home. Every night that you go home, you're no longer the CEO. Your dad, you're back to maybe being a long snapper. And so this is a holistic life comment. This is less about just, we alternate hats so often. And so the fact of the matter is, if in that analogy, even the quarterback is a long snapper at a different step of the day. So technically, therefore, we all know what it's like to be a long snapper, and think about those times where you don't feel seen. And then if you have empathy and you want to connect with others, how could you possibly treat others the way that you're treated in those worst of moments? You wouldn't do it. And here's I want to give a shout out to a former leader that I've had named Bob Chapman. He's the CEO of Barry Waymiller, and very close in the Simon Sinek space. He wrote the book, Everybody Matters. And Bob had a great philosophy, and it really transformed the way I thought about it. Because again, I've been a manager on my worst day, and then I've been a leader on my best day. And so the way he got me to think about it was, every single person in your company is somebody's son or daughter. So would you want your son or daughter, whether you have them literally or not, would you recommend your best friend go work for your team, your company? And when you really humanize it like that, it becomes a lot less about how many widgets you sell, and it becomes more about humanity. And what you realize after being a poor manager versus a great leader, which I've worn both hats, is the difference is so massive. And when you actually put the holistic person first and they feel valued, the numbers take care of themselves. So I'm not just here to be some airy fairy, hey, go out and save the world and people for no. It is actually a great business strategy too, but not as a strategy. It has to come from your heart, because people will see through it if you don't have care and compassion at the forefront.
So good. So good. Everyone can learn from that one, and should. And those of us that are understanding that are doing it, it's great. It's just a great reminder, I think, because you can't do enough of it, in my opinion. And I'll mention this again at the end of the podcast, but if you're interested in the book, powerofplayingoffense.com is a great way to learn more about the pillars, the book, how to get it, the newsletter. There's so much good content. And Paul's website is paulepsteinspeaks.com. I want to get to the baseball themed questions, even though
big time, bro.
By the way, it doesn't matter. I'm just curious. Were you a Dodger fan growing up, or were you a Yankee guy? You mentioned the Yankees.
I'll give you the very quick version. So part of this is how I ended up being a salesperson. So when I was young, my family said I'm either going to be a salesman or they said a salesman or a sports agent. Those are my two options. And it's because I wouldn't shut up. I just talked so much. So I love to debate. So when I was a little youngster, I basically went against the grain. Any team my family liked, I just did the opposite to tick them off. So I was one of those. So they were all Dodgers. I was Angels. At the time, we had a couple of football teams. So, when they were Raiders, I was Rams. Then let's see, basketball. I was probably the only Clipper fan in town. Everybody was Lakers, of course. I just did it to be a you-know-what. And hey, it thankfully gave me a communication skill. But that's kind of how I rolled as a youngster.
All right. Fair enough. I think I was told a lot of the same things. It was never sports agent, but I mean, it was going to be something sales or something because I never shut up. And that's what my first and second grade teacher, I don't know which year it was, because we had the same, once she moved up with us, that people asked me, when did you know you wanted to be a broadcaster? I said, I don't know, but I remember my first and second grade teacher telling my parents that I was driving her and the class nuts with all the updates on the game the night before, whatever game, baseball, football, very disruptive, wanting to let everybody know what had happened in that game. So, okay, baseball themed questions. What's the biggest home run you've hit?
Biggest home run. There's a couple, and one I've already mentioned. So I'm only going to speak to one, but my true answer is finding my why, because without that, none of the other amazing things after would have happened. So I've already shared that story. So if I had to say biggest home run, in this case, business-wise, it was breaking the Super Bowl revenue record. It was just a massive accomplishment. It was a massive feat. It was about 4x, 5x revenue expectations versus the prior year against all odds. It was a game in New York, so working out of the league office. And I share that with you because there was a lesson in there and I think this will resonate. While that was the biggest feather in the cap, if you will, from a professional milestone standpoint, it made waves in the sports industry, no doubt. So imagine me running a national sales campaign. I'm like the point guard of the campaign. I'm the distributor. I'm the guy that's bringing everybody together, rallying the troops. Basically, it's the biggest fundraiser that the sports industry had ever seen, is how I think about it. And I did the heaviest lifting. If I had to quantify it, for sure, over 50%, 60, 70, 80, who cares? It was a lot. At the Super Bowl after party where they're giving recognition and accolades, they were shouting out the folks that were responsible. And guess what? My name never came. And when they did that, I literally felt so small. And that's where my spirit of saluting the long snapper came from. I know what it's like to feel insignificant and to not feel like I matter. And after one of the proudest moments, like literally a dream turned into a nightmare. So I answer it because it was a massive accomplishment, but I also know that the reason I can coach others on how to be a leader on their best day is because I know what it's like to experience the exact opposite.
Yeah, powerful lesson, and a great moment that in many ways turned greater because of the perspective that you were able to take from it. So that was not a swing and a miss, but I always like the swings and misses because they become home runs if we learn from them. I say that over and over again. What's your biggest swing and miss, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so entry-level manager, and we kick butt on the scoreboard. In the sales department, you've got quotas and KPIs and goals and metrics, and it's a pretty black and white game. You either did it or you didn't, and we did it. And I remember I had the job for about 2 years. And after about the first year, I got a pretty big head because of the accomplishment. And I started to obsess about the next. And I lost gratitude for the moment. I literally was probably applying for multiple jobs per month, even though I technically was happy doing what I was doing. I was working with great people, but I was just so young and immature that I just got overly obsessed with the grass is greener. And I saw my peers that maybe I started in the sports industry with start to get promoted before me. And it created a very negative feeling inside of me. I felt less than. I felt very envious. And I'm not proud to say this now, but I also am very open to share it because I don't want people to fall into the same pitfalls that I did. And the point being, when you are happy, when you are fulfilled, when you are working with great people, sometimes the best strategy is just to stay where you are. And honestly, Joel, there were some opportunities that I was chasing at the time. And now I reflect back, I would have almost been embarrassed to be in the opportunity. It was like trying to convince yourself to leave the one just because, we've been dating for a year. That is the worst argument I've ever heard. But that's what I tried to do professionally at my earliest stage. And so I learned the lesson of be where your feet are, be patient, And just be grateful if you are happy, because that's really what winning looks like in life.
Love that. All right. So the small ball question, which is so much of what you've already talked about. So I'll have you narrow it down a little bit. What is small ball to you? What are the little things that add up to the big wins, the big results?
No doubt. So let's say that the big win is to be an inspirational leader. If I were to give that as a backdrop, I want everybody listening in right now, a bit of a quick exercise. Think of the greatest leader that you've ever had, any walk of life. They could have been a coach of yours, a mentor. Maybe they were business related. Maybe it was a parent. Whoever that person is, think of them and think of why you just chose them. What did they do? What were their actions? What were their behaviors? How did they show up every day? And when I do this in a live setting, I'll have a flip chart behind me and I'll start to source answers from the group. And I'll get all responses, Joel, that lead up to the small ball. I'll get responses like they were great listeners. They had passion. They had empathy. They were very trusting. They were consistent. And I could keep going on. But I've never written down the words in this exercise: boss, manager, supervised, none of that. So then why does the world describe leadership as rank, role, title, authority? But then when I say, tell me about the best leader, those words don't come up. I actually just get those inspirational daily attributes that's the leader that we imagine. That's who we want to be on our best day. And so I then ask the group, so now I'm asking your entire audience of Rounding the Bases, if all of those different attributes I just said, and I just named a handful of 30, 40 that I could have come up with, do you need a title to do those things? And the answer, do you need a title to be a great listener, to have empathy, to be passionate, to be a visionary? No. So if we don't need a title, the reality of leadership is the reason you would follow the person to no end that you thought of, the parent, the coach, the mentor, the business person, is because before they led others, they led themselves. They were the role model. They led by example. And those daily habits, attributes, behaviors, those are the small ball things that add up to massive, massive success. And here is the closing thought. I always get asked the question of, are leaders born or developed? Or are they born or made? And it's not even close. Think about the example I just said. All of those things are learnable, trainable, accessible, no title required. They're at your fingertips right now. If you want to step into the leadership of self, it's there immediately. So the reality is leaders are developed, and that includes everybody listening in right now.
It's so good. And it never stops. I'm going to say it over and over again. You never stop learning. Just because you become a leader doesn't mean that you have it all figured out. And any one of us can be leaders. You're right. It doesn't take a title. By the way, there are plenty of people with fancy titles that aren't very good leaders either. And we know
ton.
Yes. So that's a whole nother discussion. All right, 4 final questions as we round the bases. The first one, I'll go a little bit lighthearted. You spent a lot of time on a football field, and you've seen a lot of big moments and Super Bowls and all that. Yet your, I would imagine, greatest moment on a football field had nothing to do with football.
Yeah, you obviously did your homework. So if I could look back, I mean, yes, I loved working in all the different sports that I touched, but my heart was always in football. And so if you would have asked me crowning moment, no doubt being in a leadership role for 2 different Super Bowls, I would have bet my life that would be the crowning jewel of it all. And to be 100% real with you, Joel, it's a distant second being a part of those Super Bowls, because coincidentally, about a month after Super Bowl 50, which was hosted at Levi Stadium, that was the same stage that I got married on. So March 12th, 2016, my partner, my rock, my soulmate, my best friend, Myra, and I, we are literally getting married on the field of Levi Stadium, which the crazy thing is, man, everybody assumes it's my idea because I'm the diehard football fan. But let me just ask everybody listening out there, do you want to get married at your office? because while my office happened to be a really cool venue and it's a massive NFL stadium, it still was where I worked every day. And so as usual, I got outvoted 1-1. And so lo and behold, she says, honey, I hear you throw big events at the stadium, and one thing led to the next. What's really crazy is, so I'm of proud Mexican descent. My mom is Mexican, my wife full Mexican. And so let's just say this to bring everybody into the world of March 12, 2016. There was a taquero. There was more tequila than I care to share. And there was also a first in Levi Stadium history, a mariachi band. I don't think there was ever one before, and I know there's never been one since. So between tacos, tequila, and mariachi, it was one heck of a time.
Man, I wish I could have been there. Sounds pretty amazing. And one that I guarantee you no one, especially you guys, will ever forget. Well, unless there was too much tequila, but you get the point.
That's fine. Until midnight, we are all good, my friend.
It's an amazing story. All right, second question as we round the bases. Yeah. You referenced back earlier in the podcast seeing that Mel Kiper infomercial, if you will. Shoot, he's been around so long. I remember in college at one point for a draft, slicking my hair back and with all my roommates pretending like I was Mel Kiper. I assume, I don't know. Did you ever meet him? Did you ever thank him?
Yeah, you know what? We bumped into one another at a conference years and years after that. It probably was about a 7-8 year gap, and it was a very quick exchange. But yes, I did say hello to him. I did give him the quick backstory of, hey, if it wasn't for you, I'd be in sports. He kind of gave me a double take, like, all right, that's a weird way to introduce yourself at a cocktail hour. But needless to say, yeah, so we did shake hands. Great dude. We got to chop it up for a few minutes, and I meant what I said. Without Mel and without his energy and without me having it on ESPN radio at the right time, at the right place, and the right channel, all these things, like serendipity 101.
Pretty cool. Third question as we round the bases. I'm not just saying this to promote my upcoming episode, but hey, why not? It always helps to be able to promote each other. And you and I had what I call in the podcast world, or stealing from the sports world, the home and home. I was on yours, you're on mine. And so that was a lot of fun. I just love how you dig deep into these really meaningful discussions. I can relate so much, not having come from the executive world in sports, but obviously having covered sports, that there are so many lessons, whether it's baseball, football, any of them for that matter. And you so beautifully can spell all this out to the non-sports fan too. Tell me about your podcast.
Yeah, so Playmakers Impact Unleashed. And really the genesis of it for everybody listening in is very much in the spirit of your podcast. I'll say this. I think there's a lot of shows in the podcast space about what we do. So I have a bunch of trophies and I've accomplished so much and I've achieved so much. And so it's kind of a humble brag, if you will. And then I bring people on that have even more trophies maybe, because it makes me as the host look good. And look, I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that's a safe space to play in. I wanted to disrupt that. Instead of the what, I wanted to focus on every other part of the ecosystem, which is most importantly, somebody's why. I had to understand their purpose. Then when I get into their who, I want to know what gets them out of bed. I want to know their core values. I want to know what they're on a mission to do. I want to know what type of impact they want to unleash. And then lastly, to just keep adding value to all playmakers out there listening in, the how. What is the tactical and actionable ways that you can also live and lead with purpose, that you can create massive impact in your life? So that was really the genesis of Playmakers. And we've had everybody from Olympians to sports business execs to Fortune 50 leaders to any walk of life, Navy SEAL, retired commanders. I mean, like you name it. And again, I think it's cool what they've done, but what I really want to do is shine a light on who they are and look beyond the trophy cabinet.
Love it. Can relate to all of it. And I always say, even as a longtime journalist, that if you start every question with one of the W's and the H, the who, the what, the why, the how, the when doesn't usually work as much. The what will give you a little bit of background, but typically after a game, why did this happen? How did it happen? You're at least more likely to get a little bit of a better answer. A little bit of a different world when we're dealing with, the cliches, and it's much easier to take it one game at a time, one snap at a time, on and on and on. But you get the point on that one. It's a way to dig a little bit deeper, which will lead me to my last question, the walk-off. And earlier in the podcast, You spoke about purpose on a bigger level, and it triggered me to want to ask this question. You were talking about finding purpose in New Orleans with the Pelicans, or what were they back then?
Back then, the Hornets, now the Pelicans.
The Hornets, right now the Pelicans, and the Hornets now are in Charlotte. But it's one thing to help a person find their purpose. It's one thing maybe even to help a team find its purpose. But sounds to me like this was a lot greater. And I don't know where it fits in terms of your challenges, but now you're talking about the identity of a franchise, a city. It's obviously still there, the city, but also the basketball team. What was that like?
Well, what it was like, frankly, before I understood even what personal purpose was, before I might have even said the word purpose in life, this was my crash course. This was my mastermind, if you will, on the power of purpose, because it started at a societal level. And so the quick backstory is the then commissioner of the NBA, David Stern, comes in. They take ownership, they being the league, of the franchise, because the old owner had unfortunately gotten sick and no longer operate the team. And so the league comes in. And after studying the books, we realized that we are the least economically viable franchise in the entire NBA. That ain't going to cut it for very long, especially when you're in a smaller market like New Orleans. And so we basically had a 1-year ultimatum to hit certain revenue benchmarks, or else the team has to move. New Orleans is no longer a viable city to have 2 pro franchises. The Saints are pretty dialed in. It's a football town 100%. So what about this thing called basketball? And that's kind of what brings the purpose into it, because as we kind of launched into the campaign, this had to be bigger than basketball or it wouldn't have worked. And so we kind of just came to the realization that football is king in the South. We're not going to be able to change that. So what does a New Orleanian care about? What is deep to their core? What is their identity? What would they literally fall on the sword for to say, this is my town, my city, this is what we stand for, this is what we're about? And what we realized is, for anybody listening and that's ever been in New Orleans, you know that people have passion. There is an immense amount of pride. So that's what we led with. Literally, civic pride became the marching order. And the marketing campaign, if you will, was I'm in. And one person at a time, a family 4 at a time, a company with 50 employees at a time, are you in? Was the question. And we explained the significance of being a multi-sports franchise at the pro level. And once we made it bigger than basketball, and once we touched a little pain point about, do you really want this black eye on New Orleans? You really want this scarlet letter that we lost a franchise because we couldn't step up because we're not in? And when we challenged the market like that, again, bigger than basketball, it was purpose, it was identity, it was values, it was all of that. And that's what taught me that when it is authentic to the core, purpose can transform a city, it can transform a life, it can transform so much. And that was my crash course.
Beautifully said. I think that applies to anyone, everywhere, sports franchise, big company, you name it. People need to buy in. People need to feel like they're a part of a team, that they're part of a culture, and a good culture includes everyone. It involves everyone. And so, well said. I think that is an unbelievable story, and one that could very easily be overlooked in the world that we live in, of wins and losses and revenue sheets and on and on. All that's important. But if people aren't buying in, and I know this is so much of what you talk about, I want to remind everybody that the website is paulepsteinspeaks.com. You can find everything that you want on there, from the book, which is The Power of Playing Offense, the podcast, all the courses, the purpose labs, the speaking, you name it, Paul is doing it. And I'll tell you what, this has been so much fun. It's been, I think this one's been better than mine personally, but that's because
I would never say that, brother. I love me some home and home, as long as we're playing the same sport and we're just creating impact together. Just know I'm a massive fan of you as well. So I know this is far from the end of our journey together.
No doubt about it. Grateful that you and I were brought together over a year ago. I can't wait to continue seeing what you're doing. Again, the website, paulepsteinspeaks.com. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on.